What would you say to millions of American dollars going to fund Chinese military contractors and human rights abusers?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit.
Do you think the cutting off the federal pension funds to invest in Chinese companies could serve as a prelude to a larger trend of cutting U.S. investment in China?
It's just the first step of what needs to happen. Because what we're now talking about is a national security issue.
Chinese state media has been bombarding the Trump administration, claiming he's putting the election before saving lives. What triggered the CCP's attack?
Businesses, enterprises, companies that have been providing the lifeblood to the Communist Party, that is, Western capital, will begin moving away from China.
And how is the American media responding to the blame?
American media has been far too kind to the Chinese Communist Party.
Why is the American mainstream media so soft on the Chinese Communist Party? Are they lagging behind the public opinion? Could Trump's strategy of economic distancing be exactly what the CCP fears most? I discussed these questions with Curtis Ellis, Policy Director of America First Policies. All right, thank you, Mr. Ellis, for being with us today.
Great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, recently, Chinese state media attacked the U.S. over its handling of the virus, saying the Trump administration is putting election and deflecting blames before saving lives. The Global Times also said China would never allow so many infections. So what is the Chinese Communist Party trying to do?
The Chinese Communist Party is trying to deflect blame from itself where it squarely lies for this global pandemic. In the early days of the outbreak, the Chinese Communist Party covered it up. They silenced the doctors who were reporting this novel infection. They made them sign confessions to stop spreading rumors. That was actually reported in the Global Times. Then they failed to share information in a timely fashion with the World Health Organization. They refused to allow American scientists or WHO scientists and researchers into Wuhan in order to determine exactly how infectious and contagious and deadly this virus was so that we could prepare for it. They refused to share biological samples with the rest of the world so that we could, again, begin preparing treatments and gain a better understanding of what we're facing. And then finally, the Chinese Communist Party sent its agents out around the world scouring up the epidemic control gear, the personal protective equipment, and the other type of equipment, medical supplies that would be needed in the face of such a pandemic. And most importantly, they delayed sharing the crucial piece of information, which is human-to-human transmission. They fabricated a lie that this was coming from bats to humans or pangolins to humans, and if you weren't playing with your pangolin, you weren't going to catch the virus. And they knew that was not true. So the Chinese Communist Party is absolutely responsible for what's happened to the world, for the world shutting down, and for the hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions of disease-inflicted people. They are responsible. They know that as the world gains a clearer understanding of that, they're going to drop the Chinese Communist Party like a hot potato. Businesses, enterprises, companies that have been providing the lifeblood to the Communist Party, that is, Western capital, will begin moving away from China. Japan has already incentivized, given direct payments to companies to move their supply chains out of China. If every Western company were to do that, this would be a death blow to the communist regime in Beijing. They understand that, and that's why they are desperately trying to change the narrative, or let's put it this way, change the narrative is too nice a term. That's why they are lying and trying to distract and deflect attention from what really happened, and they are crafting these lies and stories and trying to place the blame everywhere, anywhere, except where it squarely lies, which is in their own house.
You know, the CCTV has run hit pieces recently, first against Secretary Pompeo and a few days ago, Steve Bannon. I think these hit pieces are mostly intended for the Chinese domestic audience. However, what do you think is their impact in America? I mean, does it solidify actually the American government resolve in holding the CCP accountable?
We have a saying in politics, if you're not being attacked, you're not doing your job. And all of the attacks by the Chinese Communist regime against Secretary of State Pompeo and Steve Bannon only redouble their commitment to keep whacking away and smacking away at the Chinese Communist Party. This does not lessen the regime, the determination to take on these thugs. It actually redoubles the determination. So the American public, quite honestly, is not paying much attention to what's coming out of Beijing. The concern I would have, and I'll be quite candid in sharing this, is that American media has been far too kind to the Chinese Communist Party. They've given them far more credit than they deserve, and they very often tend to parrot the propaganda line coming out of Beijing. Now, you can see a little leakage in this area where they'll talk about Secretary of State Pompeo being a hawk or being hawkish or taking a tough line against China. He's not. He's taking a realistic line against the Chinese Communist Party. And you're not going to see any diminution of commitment or effort on the part of the Trump administration or individuals like Steve Bannon because of some criticism that's coming out of the Communist Party of China. That'll only reaffirm their commitment that they're on the right path here.
So what do you think, so why do you think the American mainstream media is so soft on the Chinese Communist Party? I mean, are they lagging behind the public opinion of the American people?
Yes, the American mainstream media, the corporate media, I call it, not mainstream, because they are far out of the mainstream. The American public is quite clear about the danger that the Communist Party of China poses to America. Poll after poll, all the survey research shows that the American public wants to see American companies move out of China, move back to the United States, move to the industrial democracies. They want to see the United States self-sufficient, or at least sufficient on reliance not the right word, but trading with our friends, not with a hostile foreign power, which is what the communist regime in China is. That's where the American people are. That's mainstream opinion in America. The corporate media, however, is someplace else. Number one, the commentators on the air are all overeducated, highly educated. They went to the finest schools where they were taught about this doctrine of globalism and that somehow all countries are the same. And unfortunately, in too many of the elite universities in America, the Communist Party of China has been normalized. And it's been treated as if it's just no different than the ruling party in France or Germany or anywhere else. And that's clearly not the case. It's a criminal enterprise masquerading as a legitimate government. Then the other problem we have with the mainstream media, the corporate media, is you look at NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN. All of these companies, all of these media companies are owned by larger companies, larger conglomerates, global conglomerates that have business interests inside China. ABC is owned by Disney. Disney has a motion picture studio that wants to sell its movies in China. It has a theme park in China. NBC, the same thing. Its parent company owns Universal Pictures, which distributes movies in China and is building a theme park in China. CBS, Viacom. Viacom owns Paramount Studios, sells motion pictures in China. We saw what happened to the NBA, the National Basketball Association, when one of its coaches criticized the Chinese Communist Party for its abuse and persecution of democracy protesters in Hong Kong. The thugs ruling the thugs in the Forbidden City said to NBA, well, that's a very nice franchise you have here in China. I'd hate to see something happen to it. You should retract that. And there was a big clamor to silence and shut up and deny freedom of speech to this American coaches of American basketball teams. Well, that lesson was not lost in the corporate executive suites of ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN. They all saw what could happen to their motion picture franchises, to their theme parks in China, if they really start stepping on the toes and calling it like it is with the Chinese Communist Party. So there's a vested interest in them going along with the party line. There's a business interest with them going along with the party line. And then there's basically sort of the conventional wisdom. For the last 40 years, the conventional wisdom was China's just like us, the Chinese Communist Party is just like us, and it's only these fringe actors who think there's something wrong with communism, or there's something wrong with the regime in China. Look, they eat fried chicken like we do at KFC, they drink Starbucks like we do, they must be just like us. Really nothing to worry about here.
In light of rising demands to hold the CCP accountable for the coronavirus pandemic, President Trump is moving quickly to block a federal pension fund from expanding its investment holdings in China. This pension fund, namely the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP, is similar to a 401k for U.S. federal employees and military members. It controls $700 billion federal retirement assets. The White House frustration with the pension fund stemmed from a decision the FRTIB made back in 2017. The Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board oversees the Thrift Savings Plan. The board decided to change its international fund to a global fund that excludes the U.S. market. This fund, called MSCI World ex-US Investable Market Index, includes Chinese stocks with close ties to Chinese government and military. The plan is set to take effect later this year. According to the Federal News Network, the board's decision severely risks the federal retirement funds being exposed to Chinese military contractors and human rights abusers. These companies include Hikvision, which was placed on the trade blacklist in 2019 for deploying surveillance technology in detention camps for Uyghurs. The fund also invests in telecom company ZTE, which was penalized by the U.S. government for violating U.S. sanctions. In response, President Trump announced on May 4th his plans to replace at least 3 of the current TSP board members. The president wants to stop the flow of pension money into Chinese companies. But how much can he really do? I asked Mr. Ellis. President Trump is trying to block the Thrift Savings Plan from investing in Chinese companies that pose national security concerns to America. However, this is a stepping on the brake kind of action. These kind of investments should have been stopped by the TSP board for multiple reasons. But they said, everyone else is doing it. All the institutional investors are buying these indexes. So they failed to stop this. And the MSCI could also not to include the Chinese companies, but they only look at the numbers. And the Chinese companies' performance numbers are not bad. So they said they had no reason not to include the Chinese companies. Moving forward, what do you think should be the long-term solution to this problem? We cannot depend on the president to issue executive order every time, right?
That's correct. There's a supposedly independent board that rules the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the retirement funds for federal workers, which includes active duty military personnel as well. This independent board has adopted this ridiculous standard that it's only money, folks. It's just business. And if we invest money in companies that are owned by a hostile foreign power, it's somehow good for business. The United States government should not be sending its money to these Chinese companies, which are controlled by the CCP. this independent board should be instructed not to do that. The MSCI index, again, this is one of these international emerging market index funds, which is treating Chinese companies as if they're no different than companies in other countries. And this is another example of the problem of having normalized the CCP, treating it as if it's no different than Mexico or Turkey or Brazil or France or Germany or Spain. But that's not the case. It is very different. They don't play by the same rules. And in fact, these companies listed in this market index, in this index fund, and also these companies are listed on the New York and American stock exchanges, they don't open their books. There's no way to audit them. We don't know if their earnings reports are legitimate or if they're just made up out of whole cloth. The government in Beijing treats these companies' books as state secrets, and they do not allow them to be audited by the Accounting Oversight Board, which every other company listed on the American exchange has to open its books. So they're being held to a lesser standard. The solution to all of this would be for American investors to be clearly warned that these Chinese companies are opaque. They're no better than giving your money to Bernie Madoff. You don't know what you're getting. And even better, the real solution is these Chinese companies should be delisted from American stock exchanges. They should not be allowed to sell their shares in America unless and until they allow their books to be audited the same way as any other American company has to allow their books to be audited. We need to enforce our laws. We need to hold them to the same laws as American companies. And further, there's other securities that Chinese entities are selling in the United States, not on stock exchanges, and these companies should not be allowed to sell their securities here. That's called deregistering. So we're talking about delisting companies from American stock exchanges that do not allow their books to be opened and audited in a transparent fashion. And number two, deregister. These Chinese companies should not have access to American capital, to American investors' capital, because they're opaque, they're potentially fraud-ridden. We've seen it many times, and they're not allowed. Look, there's a reason we set up a Securities and Exchange Commission back in the 1930s, and that was to protect American investors and to protect the integrity of the American securities market. If you have someone coming in here and selling securities, but they're completely not allowing you to see what's inside the company, that destroys the integrity of the entire market. It corrupts the entire market. The reason the American exchanges and the American securities market is so strong and so vibrant is because people have confidence in it, that you're not allowed to sell counterfeit goods here, if you will. These companies that don't open their books, it's like selling counterfeit goods or selling snake oil. You don't know what you're getting. So a lot of this can be changed. You don't need legislation. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has the power to change its regulations and to change its regulations to delist and deregister these companies. It can be done by the stroke of the pen. It's not even require an executive order from the president. The Treasury Department could do this tomorrow, and that would maintain the integrity of the American securities market, and it would cut off the blood supply to the Chinese Communist Party. It would cut off the money that it needs to survive, and it would protect American investors from being defrauded by these companies that are potentially fraudulent. If they're not letting us read their books, why are we letting them sell their stock here?
Okay, so if we can really do that, in that case, do you think the cutting off the federal pension funds to invest in Chinese companies could serve as a prelude to a larger trend of cutting U.S. investment in China?
Yeah, cutting off the thrift savings plan, the TSP, cutting off the investment of federal retirement funds into Chinese companies, into the MSCI Emerging Market Index, is just the first step of what needs to happen. We need to hold China, the Chinese Communist Party, and its entities, whether state-owned or state-controlled, and there is no such thing as an independent company in China, so any Chinese company is essentially controlled by the CCP. We need to hold these companies to the same standards as American companies, and if they will not open their books and allow independent auditors to examine what they're doing, they should not be allowed to sell their securities in the United States of America, sell their securities in our stock exchanges, or in any of the other securities markets that obtain here. So the cutting off of federal retirement funds is but the first step. That's the first, it's a necessary step, but it's not a sufficient step. That's the first step that has to be done. But then we have to look at the broader, and not just look at, we have to act on the broader problem of potentially fraudulent and totally opaque, and there's nothing potential about the opaqueness, absolutely opaque and potentially fraudulent Chinese companies selling their securities in the United States of America. That should not be allowed and cannot be allowed. And in many of these cases, many of these companies are already under sanction from the U.S. government for being national security threats, for violating the human rights of the Chinese people, and for collaborating with terrorist regimes. So there is absolutely no reason these companies should be allowed to be doing business in the United States like this by selling securities.
You said there needs to be next steps. So when do you think these next steps will happen?
There needs to be a huge hue and cry on the part of the American people and lawmakers. We're seeing a lot of action on Capitol Hill. You have very brave senators and members of Congress, folks like Senator Rubio, Hawley, Josh Hawley out of Missouri. You've got Marsha Blackburn out of Tennessee. You've got Tom Cotton out of Arkansas. You have Jim Banks over on the House side. And you have on both sides of the aisle as well, Jim McGovern, Chris Smith, Jeanne Shaheen, a Democratic senator from New Hampshire. A lot of people are very aware of what's going on with the stock markets and the exploitation of our investors by these Chinese companies that are less than transparent, and they're demanding action. So the president, the administration, and the very staid administrative state, the Treasury Department, the bureaucracy of the Treasury Department needs to be pushed on this. They need to be pushed every way they can. It's every time somebody proposes, whether it's the cutting off the TSP or whether it's delisting Chinese companies or deregistering the sales of Chinese securities, you'll find the counter argument for people that are looking in the rearview mirror and remembering what they were taught in school 20 or 30 years ago about open markets and return on investment, and forgetting that what we're now talking about is a national security issue, and there will be no return on investment when the Chinese Communist Party controls the world.
So you think the public outcry needs to happen first, and then the next steps will happen?
Well, you never know what's going to happen in the world. This pandemic has certainly opened a lot of eyes. People have a much clearer understanding in Washington that the Chinese Communist Party is not a legitimate government, that they do not behave according to the internationally accepted rules, and they're not responsible players. And that certainly moved the ball down the field, if you will. That certainly woken people up. So you never know, another disaster like that could be enough to, I would pray against it. We can't suffer another disaster like this, but you never know. It's much harder for those who used to justify investing in China and opening up giving them all our money. It's much harder for them to justify that doing it now. a public outcry of people saying boycott China, whether it's on the consumer level or the governmental level, or withholding our money from them, withholding our recognition, our good feelings about them. That's an important component. That influences the lawmakers, and the lawmakers influence the federal government, the permanent bureaucracy that will be needed to enforce the type of bans we're talking about.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. These are all my questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I really always enjoy talking with you. I don't know if you've seen this. We have a little, we have a campaign, getoutofchina.us, and I'm happy to send you one of these.
Okay. Yes, definitely. Please send it to me. And also, please let us know how do people find you?
Okay. I'm with America First Policies. AmericaFirstPolicies.org. AmericaFirstPolicies.org. All of my writings are archived on that site. America First Policies is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization supporting the nationalist economic policies that are good for America, good for the people of China, good for every country on earth. We have to develop our own indigenous industries and talents and give our people, all of our people in whatever country we live in, give them the opportunities to participate in society, have a good job, and whatever your talents, have an outlet for it. And this is what we promote over at America First Policies, and we believe in America first. We believe in every country first for its own good. Every country is supposed to be looking out for its own good, and most of them do. Unfortunately, not all of them. The Chinese Communist Party looks out for its own good, not the good of the Chinese people. And you've got some people that think that an international bureaucracy in Geneva or Brussels is going to look out for you, and I don't necessarily believe that either. So
No, we shouldn't believe that. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis, and I really appreciate it.